Hey guys and gals, we are on to lesson 2 for this basic platformer. So I've gone and grabbed a few new assets here. I've got something to use for a pickup, something to use for an enemy projectile, something to use for a player projectile, and then something to use for an enemy. So you should probably pause the video and go get those things for yourself if you're following along. I just wanted to save the time. Remember, in paint.net you can clear the background and you can save it as a PNG file, and then that'll work just fine for you. Okay, so just let's make sure our game is working still first and remind ourselves of what we have here. We've got this nice little jumping thing. We've got can't jump more than once in the screen here while we're in the air, and everything seems good so far. So we can certainly do more to add more platforms and make the gameplay area a little more interesting, but we're off to a good start. So for the pickups, we'll do that first here. We want to give the player some kind of objective, so it'd be a good idea to use our pickup sprite here, whatever it may be, and you can just drag one into the scene view here, and make sure you set the sorting layer to... Now it's up to you if you want to go player, platform, something like that. I think I'll just put it as player. You might want to add an additional layer here for pickups or objects or something like that. That's certainly up to you. We probably want to make it even smaller than that. Then we've got this nice little star thing here that the player should be able to pick up. We're definitely going to want to add a collider to that, and specifically we want a physics 2D here, a polygon collider 2D, so it snaps to the edges of that thing, as you can see here. And then you want to make it a trigger. So for the is trigger box, it's checked. What that means for us is that the player won't run into it. If they pass through it, then it'll detect the collision, but it won't bounce the player off of it. That's what a trigger does for us, and we use a separate method in our code to make that happen. Okay. One other thing I want to do to make this pickup sort of more visible is add a simple script to this object that's going to rotate it. That way we can have a little bit of movement on this thing, and it'll become a little more visible for the player. So we'll just call it pickup, I guess. That's fine. I've seen in different tutorials they call this rotator, and that's fine too. And then we can open that up here. Okay, not a lot complicated here. I think just once per frame we're going to want to slowly rotate the object, which is going to be transform.rotate, and then what we need is to rotate it as a vector 3. You see the tooltip there says these are the Euler angles. That's the angles you're used to. So we're going to rotate it 0 in the x direction, 0 in the y direction. Since those rotations are sort of meaningless in a 2D scape, we're rotating in z, which is the sort of axis that goes through the screen forward. So we'll rotate it 10 degrees. We'll see how that looks, and then multiply this by time.delta time to smooth it out for each frame. Okay, so if we save that and hit play here, we may need to adjust this, but let's see how it looks. It's probably a little too slow, but you get the idea there. It is rotating very slowly. I'll probably adjust that, maybe go 30, something like that, see if that suits us a little better here. It was a very slow rotation. Still pretty slow, but that's probably fine for a pickup here. Okay, so we'll go with that. All right, so that's really all we need to have happen with the object itself here. Let's also tag it, and we'll add a tag up here, and we will add a tag for pickup. And then let's tag that thing as pickup. And I will even rename it as pickup. Okay, and then once we have that, we can make a prefab out of it by dragging that down into here. And before we add a whole bunch more of these in here, let's make sure that this one is working properly. So to work properly, we're going to need to tell the player what to do when it hits something that's tagged pickup. So let's open up our player controller code. And what we have here, outside of the update method, we want to add another method for onTriggerEnter2D. This is the method that runs when we hit a trigger of any kind. Okay, I always like to rename this as other. Hopefully it autofills for you. If not, you should type this out, but if those autofills aren't working for you, then you've got a problem there. So if we hit something tagged pickup, so that's if other.tag equals pickup. This is case sensitive. You've seen this before. Make sure that this matches what we put as the actual tag. Then we will just, for now, destroy it just to make sure it works. So destroy other.gameObject. Save that. Go back to our scene and make sure that when we hit that thing, it's actually being destroyed. Remember, you always want this in a working state. Okay, looks good. It's almost as if we picked it up. Nice. Okay. We can also go back to our player controller code here, and let's add a variable for score. Score. We'll set that to 0 at start. And here we will also score point. Score plus plus. And then we can display the current score to the console. So the console is that area for testing. We want to make sure that this is working correctly before we go and add a bunch of UI elements to the screen, because that's a whole thing. Okay, so for now we'll just do lowercase p print, and it'll be, just do score and plus score. Okay, so when we score point, it'll say what the score is there. So we shouldn't see anything in our console. When you hit play here, the console is defaults as this tab here. Again, if you can't see it, I like to have these options selected. If you can't see the console, it's under Window. It's the very bottom option, Console. Okay. So while we're playing, this gives us feedback from our code, any print statements that we do. We have a null reference exception still, which is kind of a pain, but we just decided last week that we don't have to worry about that. But anyway, it says score 1, so that worked. Okay. So now that we have that, we can just go back to our project window here. We've got this prefab for the pickup that we made, and we can just drag a bunch of them in here and say, hey, player, come get all of these. Something like that, whatever. Okay, then we can test it out, and we should see. Also, the bottom line of the console, the most recent line, appears at the bottom of your screen, the very bottom line of Unity by default here. Right here. So if I hit that first one, it says score 1 right there. So that's something to look out for. Or you can have the console window open and see all the messages. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, I'm an expert. Okay, so that's pickups. Pretty easy. They'll all rotate at the same speed there. Some cool other stuff you could do. You could randomize it. You could do, you know, whatever you see fit, but that gets the pickup working pretty simply. Okay. Let's also, at this point, have an enemy. I'm going to need to do a little bit of sprite editing here really quickly, so bear with me. Sprite mode is multiple. Sprite editor, apply that, and we can just do a smart slice here because I'm not making an animation here. I'm just, which that might be nice, but that's not in what I found. I have automatic ones there. These are just 5 different images in one. So I can just grab all of those, we can apply that, and then I can use them individually. Okay. If you've got the wherewithal, you should definitely have an animation to these things. But this guy's sort of hoarding his stars here. Okay, so on this enemy here, let's add a Polygon Collider 2D. Okay, let's make him a trigger for good measure. Or do we want the player to bounce off of him and him to bounce off the player? I'll just make him a trigger. And we'll give him a rigid body 2D also, so that he has gravity. Well, if he's a trigger, then he won't stop when he hits the ground. Okay, let's not make him a trigger. If the player runs into him, he'll have movement. We should freeze his rotation, or some silly stuff is going to happen. Maybe we want silly stuff. I don't know. And let's tag him. Let's add a tag for enemy. Again, I'm just really speeding through this. This is stuff that we've seen before. None of it is especially complicated, but don't feel bad if you need to. Oh, he had disappeared on us. All right, why'd he disappear? What happened? Watch the inspector. His position is, where'd he go? That's curious. Oh, I didn't set his rendering layer, did I? Sorting layer. All right, sprite renderer, sorting layer. we'll give him the player sorting layer. So he was there, I just couldn't see him because the background, and that's not great. And that reminds me, we need to deal with that. But we can go see what happens when we bump into the enemy first. There's a lot of basic stuff to do here. All right, nothing yet, but I can push him sort of to his doom, but that's not what we're trying to do here. Okay, one thing at a time. Let's deal with the enemy stuff first. So back to our player controller code. We will have a separate method for the collision when we hit the enemy. So he's not a trigger, he's a collision being detected here. So this is void on collision enter 2D. And this is the moment when we actually run into something. And I didn't tag that guy, did I? Or did I? I didn't. I forgot to tag him. Alright, so tag him as enemy here. And we'll say if we hit something tagged enemy, and then this is the case where we can take damage. So if other.tag equals enemy, we don't have any sort of damage system in here, but we can just sort of a weird quirk here. Other's a collision 2D rather than a collider 2D. So there's no other.tag, it's other.gameObject.tag, which is just sort of a weird thing that's easy to forget about. But thankfully the compiler will remind you if you make a mistake like that here. Okay, so we'll just do a print statement that says, ouch, I ran into an enemy, ouch. Okay, just make sure that's working correctly. We can run it. We'll keep the console open so you can see all the messages. And ouch, 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 ouch. I have it on repeat there, on collapse, so the ouch message is actually happening a bunch of times every time I run into him. Okay, so that's a simple enemy there. You may want to turn him around. You may want to have him face this way. That would probably make sense. We want to have some kind of movement there. There's a lot that we can do. For now, he's sort of a hazard, and we can decide what to do with him here. For the sake of testing, it'd probably be a good idea to add a respawn zone, so let's do that real quick. We can just make this, we can just make it a child of the main camera. That way, if the player falls beneath the main camera at any point, then they will respawn. So we will right click here and create empty to make a child of this thing. We'll call it respawn zone. And that respawn zone right now is at the center of this thing. Let's just add a component. That's a box collider 2D, and we can see it there. You want to go probably move this thing down. So you can grab the position of this and move it down this way. Okay, so we can see where we want our collider to actually be. It's where we fall beneath the screen. And wait, come to think of it, that's not going to work, is it? Because the camera's going to follow the player, so he'll never hit that thing. Okay, so instead, I think what we want to do is set the respawn zone just under all the platforms. That way it doesn't matter when he hits the thing. So, sorry, bad idea on my part. Let's undo. Control Z, programmer's best friend here. All right, let's just make an empty game object. That's sort of not a child of anything. Call it respawn zone. Add component. It's okay to make those mistakes. That's why they have undo. We'll move it where we need it to be, kind of down at the bottom here. My Z has a weird position right now. The transform. Let's put it at 0 just in case. That was odd. Edit the collider, and we want to make sure that this covers up anywhere I'm going to have platforms, so the player can't like go around it. And it doesn't really matter how big it is at the bottom here. You can make it as big as you want. It's when they hit this thing, we're going to respawn them. Okay, so we'll just make it nice and big by zooming out, and then we'll tag it. This is actually one of the default tags. I don't need to add anything. It's the first one, respawn. Okay, so then back over to our onTrigger enter 2D method in the player controller. If we hit the respawn zone, reload the level. I think we're going to need to add a library for that reload the level bit actually. If other.tag equals respawn. So I think for this, we're going to need to go up to the very top of the code and say using Unity Engine.scene management. That gives us access to the scene manager library, so for loading levels. Okay. So we'll say we've hit the respawn zone, so what we want is scene manager dot load scene, and let's say, is it scene manager? I forget. We'll just go 0 there. This is scene 1, so the build index of it is 0. It's the first scene. That'll be fine for now. If we add more scenes, we're going to need to address that and to load the current scene, but for now, I think that's fine. Okay. So save all of that, and what we should see is if we jump off, it should reload the scene for us when we hit the bottom. Oh, I didn't make it a trigger. Is trigger. It happens. Reload the scene pretty quickly there. Get it from that. I don't jump on his head even though it hurts. Nope, couldn't jump on it. Need to push him there, and then it almost feels like a game, which is kind of neat. Okay, so couple of things here. We've got the player not really turning left to right. That's something we can address. We want to be able to display the score on the screen, so that's UI elements, so that's a whole separate thing. But right now we're just adding some basic elements into the game, and we can sort of expand them as we go. Okay, so let's modify the player so that when we turn left and right, he actually does that for us. Let's add a boolean for whether he's facing right. We'll make it public for reasons that will hopefully become apparent later. So public bool facing right. And at start, we are facing right, so we'll say facing right equals true. And then in update, what we want to say is, if we go to the left, we want to adjust facing right in here also. So before we do this stuff, if facing right, switch to left. So if facing right, then to switch to the left, it's going to be transform.localScale equals a new vector 3, and that's going to be our current transform .localScale.x. So our current x width, and then we're actually going to multiply that one by -1, and then whatever our current height is. We don't want to mess with that at all. Transform.localScale.y, and then we better set the z just in case. I don't think our z is 0 naturally. I think it's 1. In a 2D space, it gets a little odd. Just in case. Okay? So this is to flip the sprite, essentially, by changing its width to -1 times whatever it was before. We're essentially flipping it. And then we want to set facing right is false. Okay. And if they're pressing D, we're doing just the opposite. So we'll say if they're not facing right, we will switch to right over here. So I copied that up there. I'll paste it here. We're going to say if not facing right. Remember, exclamation point is not. If not facing right, face right. So we flip it. We actually do exactly the same thing, don't we? Because the current scale was the flipped one, so we flip it back right here. So this is actually good as is, but we need to set it to true. So let's save that and see how that goes. You notice how often I'm going back to my program and running this thing? That makes a huge difference when you're doing your stuff. Hey, look at that. Looks beautiful. My guy can now go left and right. That's exciting. And the fact that we made that boolean for facing right public is going to make a difference in which way we shoot our projectile, because I was thinking, since I went and got that fireball, that will give this guy the ability to shoot fireballs. He says, ouch. Okay? So that's facing left, facing right, kind of flipping that way. Not too difficult to do. Couple of lines of code, not a huge deal. Okay? So next, let's give ourselves a projectile, shall we? Why not? Or do we want the UI elements first? I will go projectile. We're modifying the sort of gameplay right now. We can add that in just a bit. I don't want to go too long on this video, but we'll go one thing at a time. So projectile. Let's go to our project window. You should have an image for your projectile here. Go get it if you don't. Need to bring it forward, so give it a sorting layer of player, I guess. One trick you can do if you don't want to have 100 million sorting layers, you can set the order in layer here. So if you look at your sprite render, I'm on the player right now. If I set my order in layer to 1 on the player, then it will appear in front of anything with a ordering layer of 0. Okay? So let's just keep that as Fireball for now. We can do our renames before we make prefabs. So on this thing, let's give it a Polygon Collider 2D. Let's probably shrink it down, right? Where's my arrows? That's weird. Shrink it down, kind of put it where we like it to be here. This guy is dealing fireballs out. So he's sort of shooting them out. Something like that. So we want it to be a trigger. And we want to say that we're going to add a sprite to this thing. Let's tag it here first. So we'll add a tag for player projectile. We can have a separate one if we want an enemy projectile, which I do have an image for that, so I'd like to get to it. Okay, so make sure you tag that player projectile, and then let's add a script to that thing. The script is where we handle the movement of this thing, so we'll just call player projectile be the name of the script. Again, no spaces. And we can open that up. We can have a speed variable for this projectile, just in case we need it later. So speed equals, I don't know, 10? It's twice as fast as the player moves, I think, if I recall correctly. And we want to say, do we move left or right? So bool move right. And what we're going to do here is detect whether the player is facing right when this starts existing, for lack of a better word. When this spawns. So we're going to store that variable in our move right variable, and we'll use that to say whether we go left or right and whether we have to flip the sprite or not. So we're going to say move right equals, we'll go game object, so we'll find the player. Capital G game object. So we're going to say move right equals, sorry, I had to reload unit Visual Studio there. Game object dot find, so we're going to go find the player. And we made their facing right variable public for this very reason. Oh, we have to grab it from the script. So get component player controller dot, and then facing right is right there because we made it public. Okay? So we store whatever that variable is at the moment that this comes into existence. We store it in our variable here, and we'll use that. And then, so here, we have our sprite facing right, so we'll say if not facing right, flip the sprite. So, and this is really similar to how we just flipped the player. So, if not move right, I probably should have just called it facing right for simplicity, but not a big deal. We will say transform dot local scale equals new vector 3, and then this is the exact same code that I had from earlier actually. So local scale dot x times -1, transform dot local scale dot y, transform dot local scale dot z. Okay, so if it's not facing right, we flip the sprite. And then yeah. In update, we want it to actually move. So we'll say if move right, then once per frame, we're going to move it to the right. We'll say plus equal new vector 3. It'll be speed times the time, the delta time for the frame to frame. All right. That's where we use the speed variable, and then otherwise, if it's not, then we'll do the same thing, but subtract instead of add. paste and subtract. Okay, so shooting right, move right, else move left. Okay. Now we've only got one of those in our scene right now, but it should. So save all of that, and it should move to the right by itself, since it already exists in there, and we're facing right. Fingers crossed. Oh, that was weird. It moved to the left. That's mean. Oh, I didn't set the Boolean variable to begin with, did I? Did I? Oh, it existed at the beginning of the scene. So don't worry about that one. When we create it, it'll be correct. Okay. We'll see. I'll show you that. All right. Here in player controller, let's say in update after our movement stuff and our jump stuff, let's add shooting a fireball. So we'll say if the player left clicks the mouse. I find that's usually pretty good for shooting. If you want to do something else, you've got all these input.getKeyDowns. That's fine. I like clicking for shooting personally. Some people like spacebar, some people like control. Whatever you want to do is fine. I'll say if they left click the mouse. So if input dot, and this isn't a get key down, it's a get mouse button down. And then this takes a number. The number is which mouse button we're talking about. So 0 is left click, 1 is right click, and 2 is the middle click, I think. And then some mice have some special gaming buttons on the side. I don't mess with any of that, but that's just something to be aware of. So we're going to say, we're going to need a reference to a prefab there. So leave that for now. We're going to create a fireball at the player's position. The fireball is going to take care of the movement by itself, so we just need to create it here. Now to do this, what we need is a reference to a prefab for us to actually create. To instantiate is the word. So we'll say public game object fireball prefab, and then we need to go make it in Unity. I think we're happy with the one that we have, so we just need to make a prefab out of it, take care of our naming and that good stuff. Okay. So then drag in our reference. So this fireball, we'll just call it fireball. We will drag it down into here to make a prefab out of it. And might as well do that with the enemy too. So we'll just say Goblin, and we'll drag him down in here to make a prefab out of him too, just so that we can make more of those very easily. Okay. Now that we have a fireball, when we make a prefab out of something, we saw with the platforms, the name of it turns blue here. Okay. That's how you know something's based on a working prefab. We have a fireball now, so we can just delete this one that's in the scene. Just hit the delete key on your keyboard, and now we can drag in that reference for the player. We saved, so we've got a reference to this here. Okay, so let's drag our fireball prefab right in there with the box for fireball prefab. All right, then we just need one line of code. Right, where was I? Right here. Creating fireball at the player's position. With the so we're just gonna go instantiate. So it's what you want to create, which is the fireball prefab. It's where you want to create it, which is the player's position. And then finally, you have to say what rotation it has for this particular overload of this method. So we'll say quaternion.identity. Okay, I'll add that to the note here. Create a fireball at the player's position with the default rotation. The key here is to have an image that you're happy with that's rotated the right way, because when you get into rotations and quaternions, it becomes kind of a huge hassle. So save that, and when we click, if we did this right, pew, 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 I can shoot in both directions. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Okay. Interesting. Not when I'm jumping, though. So a couple of issues. One, you can see here, I can't shoot while I'm jumping, which I find really fascinating. I need to take a look at that. But the other issue is you can see my hierarchy is getting really clogged up with all these fireball clones. When you instantiate something, it just calls that clone in the name of it here. So the way that we can handle that is do a little bit of cleanup on the fireball. So let's go to our player projectile, then we'll figure out why it's not shooting while we're jumping. On our player projectile, let's do cleanup work. Cleanup. If the fireball is, let's say, off the screen by 1.5 the length of the screen-ish, so by a fair margin, destroy it. If it's definitely not coming back, if we don't want it to keep going on forever, so we'll just make sure we destroy it. 1.5, 1.2, we don't want stuff to happen off the screen when we can't see it. So we'll say if camera dot main, oops, we'll see camera, there we go, dot main. So if the main camera world to viewport point of our position dot, yeah, that gives us a vector 3 that is sort of the relative position of our object in the screen. So if x is greater than 1.2 f, or if it's less than negative 0.2, same thing again, copy, paste, Control C, Control V, is less than negative 0.2 f. Honestly, we could probably just use 1 and 0, but that's fine for now. So what this says, in case this isn't clear here, what I'm saying is this is the position relative to the screen of the object itself. So the very left side of the screen in X here is 0, and the very right side of the screen is 1. So if it's greater than 1.2, that means it's like off the screen and then another 20%, so it's definitely not coming back. If you want to change this to 1 and 0, that's fine. But this is saying if it's too far to the right of the screen or the left of the screen, then we're going to destroy the game object that this thing's attached to. Okay, so that should handle our first issue if I save that, which is, see, they're destroying when they go a little bit off the screen. No more clogged up hierarchy, no more memory leaks, no more issues like that. Okay, and then why isn't it jumping? Oh, I think I know why. Okay, I think we have to address that null reference exception there. Okay, let's go back to our player controller code. When I'm jumping and there's nothing beneath the player, it's looking for this right here, this tag, okay? If it doesn't exist, I have a null reference exception, which means it has trouble running the other code in that moment. So we need to address that. So what we want to say is if this exists, right? So let's copy this much. We'll say, let's declare can jump first. But I don't know. We'll update it in a second. Okay. So if that exists, if there's anything there, then we're going to see if it's tagged that way. Okay, that should take care of our null reference exception and hopefully fix all our problems and everything works perfectly forever. Let's take a look. Hey, look at that. It's a little weird that I can jump forever now, so I guess it didn't quite fix all our problems. But it did fix the one. Oh, I know why. It's if it existed. Okay, if there's anything there. If there's nothing there, we set it to false. So what we want to say here is else, if we didn't find anything at all, we'll set can jump to false. All right, hopefully that will fix all our problems forever. This is the process of developing and programming. You go through, you see what's going on, okay, and then, all right, I think that fixes it. Should have gone with that from the first place, but that's okay. We're getting the score. We're murdering goblins for no reason. Bye, goblin. I just didn't like the look of you. And then we're getting everything. Okay? So we should also probably give the goblin a chance to shoot, and then if we hit him, maybe we can say something happens to the player other than them saying ouch. But so let's go over to the goblin. Let's throw a script on him. This is going to be not too dissimilar from what we have on the player, actually. It's just it's not controlled by what the player does. It just happens automatically. So we'll say Goblin. I won't call it enemy controller because we might want more enemies later, right? So we'll just say Goblin. Like that. Okay, what does the Goblin need to have? They need to say, they'll want to have a prefab, so public game object projectile prefab. And this one will refer to whatever the enemy is shooting, right? And we'll put a script on that real fast just to make it move the same way our projectile moved. And let's keep it simple here. So we'll say, let's add a method for shoot. Void shoot. Keep it simple. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do what's called an invoke repeating. Invoke repeating means it's going to happen at certain intervals. So we'll say that the Goblin shoots every, I don't know, 2 seconds. So invoke repeating, the shoot method. We're going to say it's going to start 2 seconds into the game, and it's going to happen every 2 seconds. Shoot method starting after 2 seconds. Repeat every 2 seconds. That's what those arguments mean there. Okay, and then in shoot, we will just instantiate the projectile prefab that we have here on this Goblin, the same way we did with the player. So at our position with the default rotation. Easy enough? Now, if we have movement for this thing, we're going to want to change the facing left, facing right, all that stuff, but we don't yet. So we will just have it always shoot to the right for now, and that's something that can be adjusted, really similar to what we have there. So supposing the Goblin gets to shoot these, now's probably a good time to say he gets to shoot to the left, not the right. So let's change his scale just to -1 here. So he can face this way and he can shoot that way. We'll say those always shoot to the left for simplicity's sake for now. So we drag that up into there. Do that. He throws rocks straight ahead. We'll add a polygon collider 2D to that thing. We'll make it a trigger, and we will let it tag it. Add a tag. Enemy projectile. Whoops. No. Alright. That's not nice. Won't let me edit it. Enemy projectile. Back to that thing. Tag it. Alright. And then give it a script that says it moves to the left. Keep it simple here. Let me just call it rock, actually. Again, I'm speeding through this thing, so I'm not doing all of the interesting and cool stuff that we could do, but I just want to make sure that you've got the basics down. What just happened? Open that up. Okay. Reload that. All right, and then we just want to move to the left. So we'll give it a speed variable again like the rest. We'll set it to something like 7. He doesn't throw as fast as the player shoots. He's a slow draw enemy. And we'll say transform.position minus equal because we're going to the left. New vector 3. And again, when you've done enough of these, it becomes really quick to just throw them together like that. Save all. Go back, make sure it's working. That's weird. It did not shoot. Oh, did I not? Ugh, the sorting layers. Goodness me. We'll throw it at player again, I guess. All right, it should come shooting off over it. Yeah, look out! Ow! That could hurt. So he's just throwing rocks. All right, and then in the let's drag that reference in here. So let's make a prefab out of this. We'll call it rock. We'll make a prefab, drag it down into here. we will set up our goblin guy to have that prefab as our reference there. Drag that in. If I did it on the object in the game, I want to apply it to the prefab. So up here, just go apply. And now that happens to any goblins in the game. Okay. And then we already did the instantiate code, right? In Goblin, we sure did. We've got the reference, so we should be throwing these every 2 seconds now. 1. Can't get me, Mr. Goblin. It's kind of tricky. Okay. Let's make the rock happen. Do something when it hits us. So in the player controller, we'll say if we get hit by a rock. So can I tag that thing? I tagged it as rock, right? I hope so. Other.tag equals rock. Then we will say we can just reload the scene as if like we died. That's an option. So we just reload the scene straight up. Reload the scene due to head trauma. There you go. All right. So if we get hit by one of those rocks, then it is tagged as rock, right? Yeah. We can delete this one. We want him to shoot those out every so often. This can be a fun gotcha moment with players. Like, he only, did not, was it not tagged? It's tagged as enemy projectile. Well, that's lame. All right, let's go back to the code and fix that. Why do I do these things to myself? All right, enemy projectile. Okay. And so if I get hit by one, just come get it. Just right in the bean. Pow. All right, and then reset the level. Okay. I think that's about all the time that we have today. I'm going to continue this in a further lesson. We'll get some UI elements in here. We'll have some kind of a win condition. There's lots more cool stuff that we can do with this and make the level more interesting. So if you made it this far, thanks for following along for now, and I will see you next time.